На трибунах аллеют знамена, облака в поднебесье плывут. На зеленом ковре стадиона разноцветные майки цветут.
Hello and welcome back to the Russian Football News Podcast. While we returned last week to get together and record our RPL team of the autumn, football's finally back this week in action as Krasnodar hosts Dinamo Zagreb in their Europa League round of 32 knockout match first leg. Before that, however, we're going to run through the first half of the FNL season. Joining me this week again is David.
Good evening, James.
And Richard.
Good evening, James. Good evening, David. How are we all?
Yeah, I'm not too bad. I'm not too bad at all. I'm really excited to get into the meat of the action again. And the FNL itself does actually return on the same weekend as the RPL this season. And that's due to, of course, the revised schedule as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. And after the FNL Cup was disbanded, most clubs are just a regular spate of winter friendlies during the long break. Now, games do reconvene in the FNL at lunchtime on the 26th of this month, as the league leaders Nizhny host Krylia in the big game at the top. So to get straight into a little review of the FNL, there's been quite a lot of transfer updates going on in the long break. Richard, if you would like to run through some of the ones that really stand out for you, some of the big moves.
Yeah, it's been quite busy. It's actually, you could argue, it's actually in the FNL been more interesting than in the RPL for transfers, and there's been some quite interesting moves. Striker Dmitry Vorobyev has moved from Volga to Orenburg. Apparently, the fee was €100,000. He's been scoring a number of goals for Volga, and Orenburg obviously acquired his services. Alexander Noyok, a Ukrainian defensive midfielder, has signed from Dinamo Brest to Orenburg on a free transfer. He was part of the Dinamo Brest side that won the Belarusian Premier League in 2019. Torpedo Moscow have also had a decent window. The noteworthy signing is Danila Kozlov, who again left Volga to join Torpedo for a fee of €55,000. One-time player who appeared on a Guardian Talent to Watch list, Kirill Kolesnichenko, has signed for SKA Khabarovsk on loan from Rotor Volgograd. He's still only 21 years of age as well. Momo Yansane, a Guinean striker who scored a number of goals in Belarus, has signed for Nizhny Novgorod, young forward. Also signing for Nizhny Novgorod are two other very good signings, in my opinion, for FNL level, in Leo Goglechidze, who had a loan spell, who was playing regularly in the FNL for, I've forgotten the team he was playing for, Goglechidze, but he was signed by Krasnodar in the January window and then has now been loaned to Nizhny Novgorod. They've also signed Ilya Berkovsky from Lokomotiv. Lokomotiv originally bought him from Torpedo Moscow and now loaned him to Nizhny Novgorod. Torpedo won't thank Lokomotiv for that because Nizhny are a promotion rival for Torpedo, but nonetheless it's a good buy for Nizhny. Also interesting is Krasnodar too. They've bought a striker from the third tier PFL, Igor Andreev, a 19-year-old from Nosta. I think he's hit about 8 or 9 goals for Nosta at that level in the third tier, and he's signed for Krasnodar too. €22,000 fee apparently. And then two other transfers I want to note is Andrei Nikityin, who was bought by Lokomotiv from FAKL in the FNL and then loaned back to FAKL for the rest of the season. And finally, a Moldovan winger, Marius Josipoi, who has gone to Veles Moscow on loan from Dacia in Moldova. There's some of the names and transfers that I've highlighted as being ones to watch.
Kolesnichenko returning to SKA is quite an interesting transfer, considering when they were back in the RPL, they signed him almost immediately after the Guardian Next Generation was published, without him ever really getting into the Chitanova side, and he only played once on loan before then going back to his parent club. But they obviously had seen that as a little bit of a panic and a desperate attempt to try and stay up that season. But long term, he must have impressed them, and I'd be interested to see how he does get on back at SKA again for the second time. Now, David, do any of these transfers particularly stand out to you? And it does seem like some of the manoeuvring of youngsters is perhaps to get around the limit check issue that's in the FNL now.
Yeah, absolutely. I was going to mention a few of the ones that Rich brought up. The Kolesnichenko one's a sub loan, which is really interesting because he's only on loan to Rotor from whatever team in Kazakhstan he moved to, whenever that was last summer. So I think he's on loan from a club that he's on loan from, which is a weird one. The Vorobyev one was a strange one because he left Volgov, Orenburg, which are both Gazprom control clubs. So I was always a bit suspicious about that. I think Richard highlighted three good ones at Nizhny, and also the fourth signing they've made, another Georgian striker, Kvateradze. He was scoring a bunch in this winter break in the friendlies before he'd signed. So that's a nice pickup there, I think, from Nizhny. 4 strong players to add to the squad to really try and boost them towards promotion. Torpedo also brought in Žiga Školfek from Orenburg, the Slovenian midfielder. And we all know he's a good player. He was playing in the RPL and he was always a solid little player. And I think he'll come into that Torpedo team and really just step into that hole next to Ryazantsev and become that playmaker or behind the striker sort of guy to replace Burkovsky, which is where he was sort of deployed before he went off to Lokomotiv and then back to Nizhny. So that'll be a great signing, I think. Školfek. Big one in the lower half of the table was Kuzia Rapayev, veteran striker who was at Tekstilshik Ivanova. Scored a bunch of goals. Just a big classic Russian striker. Big bully of a guy, like 6'3", whatever, and just scores from crosses and headers for fun. He left and went to FNL, which big move there from one relegation rival to another. Mm-hmm. And that could really change FNL's season. They'd had a big turnaround. They were really struggling, but they ended the season 5 games without defeat. Ended the first half of the season. So I think that'd be a big move there. If we've seen the trend of players graduating up from the FNL to the RPL, which has sort of been growing in the last year or so. Ramazan Kajmuradov and Artyom Maximenko went from SKA and Veles respectively off to Ural. Both youngish players, both 23 or less. And I think there'll be really good signings for Ural's front line where they've been struggling really to score goals. So that's a nice move. Nice move there. Quite like down at Dinamo Bryansk in the relegation zone, they picked up Jamal Dibagachev. If you remember, he was the guy who was at Angie once upon a time, played a couple of games in the Premier League, and then went off to Portugal and famously scored, I think, 5 in a game over there, or 6 in the game, something like that. And in the summer, he was on trial at Torpedo and a host of other FNL clubs because last season in the PFL, he scored about 15 or 16 goals in about 10 games. But no one signed him and he went to Belarus. So he's come back to Dinamo Bryansk to replace Maxim Vortinov. And I think that could be a good move. Granted, Dinamo are really rooted in the relegation fight. But I'm intrigued to see how that one goes down because he's got the goal scoring pedigree. And I think it could go well. The last couple I'll mention is just Irtysh Omsk lost they've lost their captain, Maslovsky, who went to Orenburg. And it's rumoured that their striker, Sishivoy, who they signed from Crimea in the summer, could also be heading off to Orenburg. He came in late in the window and scored 4 and assisted 4 or something like that. Pretty good numbers for a team who were in the relegation fight and just crept out of it before the winter. Orenburg were lacking goals in the first half of the season. Joe Famier did not do it for them. So they brought in Vorobyev, and there's rumours that they're going to go for Sichivoy as well. So there are 2 big gaps in the Irtysh team who have yet to be filled. So they need to try and do something, I think, to fill those voids before the window closes.
Now focus a little bit further down the table in the mid-table section of the FNL. Now, one player you mentioned there who has made the jump from the FNL to the RPL is Artyom Maximenko. Now, you, David, have highlighted him quite a few times on the pod and on the website. And for everyone listening out there, if you go onto the site, we published yesterday, which was Monday, the part 5 of David's mid-season review of the FNL. Now, in that review, you mentioned that Veles had been arguably the surprise package of the FNL season so far. Do you think that Maximenka's move will, and the fact that quite a few other Veles players, as the team's been picked apart quite substantially, do you think that could really have an impact on Veles' second half of the season?
Yeah, it will be interesting to see how they replace him. Josipoi, from what I know, we've had a relationship with his agent, Josipoi's agent at RFN. So I had a chat with his agent when I saw the move go through, and he said that they're not quite similar players. Josipoi's more of a creative winger who'll cut inside, whereas Maximenko was a striker come wide player who was being put in both positions. There was an interview with their manager, Alexei Stukolov, which you shared with me earlier on, James, and he mentioned he was talking about how important Maximenko was to their setup in some matches. So that will be a big loss. And to say with Josipoi, I don't think is necessarily the replacement. They brought in Proshikov and Fedchuk as strikers. Fedchuk's a guy who has had good FNL records in the past. Was in the Premier League last year with Tambov, not really playing on the reg. Scored a few goals as I recall. I think he scored a penalty against Spartak for some reason, which is a strange one. But yeah, it'll be interesting. The big other loss they had was their goalkeeper, Gorodovoy, who was on loan from Rubin. He jumped across the country, sorry, to join SKA Khabarovsk. And he was really good for them in the first half of the season. Their two other goalkeepers are quite young. Both have got good records, though have not been on the field during a defeat yet. So hopefully one of those two can step up. But yeah, Maximenko, it was always on the cards. He was having such a good season. So it was always on the cards that he could go. And hopefully either the experience of Fedchuk or the raw talent and sort of pace of Proshilakov, who had been on Torpedo's books in the first half of the season and not really done it. Hopefully one of those two can come in and do it well. Veles have got a very young squad. Stukolov, in that interview that you shared with me, he was talking about the fact that he likes to work with young players, and he'd convinced Maximenko to join Veles as on the basis of their previous work, and the fact that he wanted this young player to, he wanted to give him regular football, which he was not getting at his previous club, which was Nizhny Novgorod. So, maybe he can get the best out of Proshliakov. Spartak academy graduate. He's obviously got some talent there to have come through that system. So, maybe it's all about finding the right coach to bring it out of you, as we've seen in the past. With guys like Smolov at Ural, and Maximenko at Veles earlier this season. So maybe it'll be the right fit, and we have to hope that it is.
Yeah, what I really like in that's Stukalov interview, which is on Counter Press for anybody who's trying to find it. It's interesting to see how much he finds inspiration in a certain Kurban Bedeyev's tactics. He's mentioned in piece that he's studied Bedeyev's tactics quite a lot. He's been visited by Bedeyev, and when he was studying for his Category A pro license, and in spite of the fact that he plays very attacking football, very quite exciting and fast paced, it's very similar to. In the interview, they actually refer that it's very similar to Atalanta's in Serie A, just to give an indication of just how attacking it is. It's really interesting to see how many parallels and how much he has learned from somebody like Bedeyev, and it just shows how the Turkmen is held in regard in footballing circles in the country. It's a really good one to read out and to keep an eye out on Alexis Stukalov's career, because he's still only 37 and he's doing quite an excellent job at Veles. But if we move on to what is essentially the title race right now, there is four teams really a little bit clear, with two just behind in Alanya and Veles themselves, behind the current four who occupy the playoff positions. Now, Richard, you mentioned that quite a few of the top sides have strengthened quite a lot, but one of which who hasn't is Krylia Sovietov. Do you think Krylia may struggle without strengthening, or do you see them as real contenders?
I still see Krylia as contenders, purely on the basis that Ivan Sergeyev is just a goal scoring machine at that level. He's hit 22 goals this season, and I was watching a lot of clips last night of his goals this season for Krylia, and he's just basically a perfect penalty box striker. And basically, if there's decent wingers at Krylia, they just put the ball in the box to him, and he'll score with his head. He's brilliant. He's brilliant in the air. He can score all types of headers, bog standard headers, diving headers. There's one header he scored, which is a looping header right over the keeper from right at the back end of the penalty box. And I think as long as Sergeyev stays fit, I think Krylia, because they've got a proven goal scorer at that level, they should be able to sustain their challenge. I mean, it's obviously a bit of a concern that they couldn't bring anybody in. They were linked with an Icelandic player, I think, but obviously I think they were quoted up on the foreigner limit. So it's even affecting FNL teams, never mind RPL teams. We go on about it every podcast. But yeah, they've also managed to, I think, keep Dmitry Kabutov, who's got 12 assists for them this season. And often a lot of their goals have been Sergeyev header, Kabutov assist. So they've managed to keep hold of him. And Yegor Golenkov, too, who's the second top scorer with 9 goals. So long as Golenkov and Sergeyev stay fit, I think Krylia will still be up there. Obviously, it's a bit of a concern. The other 3 teams around them, Torpedo, Orenburg, and Nizhny, all strengthening. But I think, Zinkovski's still there. I'm still just astonished nobody has come in for Zinkovski. I saw links in the January transfer window that Vitesse Arnhem was supposedly interested, but obviously nothing's come of it because he's still at Krylia. So I'd be a little bit worried if I was Krylia, but then again, they got the 8 players from Chertanova this summer, because obviously they got the 4 million transfer fee from Sobolev, who went to Spartak. He was initially on loan and then went to Spartak in the summer, and the permanent transfer fee got deposited into their accounts. And then they went and got the 8 lads from Chertanova. So a bit of a concern for Krylia, but I think as long as they keep Sergeyev, Golenkov, and probably Kabutov fit, then I think the promotion challenge should be still be up there, but it's going to be tight because the other 3 sides are a number strengthened, so it should be interesting to watch.
Yeah, certainly. I think yes, they haven't strengthened, but amidst the top 4, in my opinion, they have arguably some of the highest quality up there. David, who would be your contenders really for the promotion race? Are you looking forward to seeing?
Well, I mean, the obvious ones are the top 2, Krylia and Nizhny. Nizhny are just so solid in defence. They've just first off season. It's just such an experienced squad. We were talking just before the pod that obviously in the FNL you're obliged to play one under-21 Russian player. It has to be on the pitch at all times, other than in extreme situations like international call-ups or red cards. And they only had 2 real under-21s in their squad, which was the goalkeeper Sisuev and Timur Suleimanov up front on loan from Lokomotiv. So they every game had to play one of those 2, and Suleimanov tended to be the one who got the nod. And the rest of the squad behind that is all guys who have got a lot of FNL and in a lot of the cases who have got RPL experience. These are all guys who had spent a lot of their career in the lower half of the RPL. Guys like Temnikov, Sapeta, and they've been on ridiculously good form this season. Sapeta and in particular has been really good. So with the signings they've made this January, guys like Jansan Goglichidze, who was from Chaika, by the way, was the club you were looking for, Richard.
Cheers.
Goglichidze, the new Georgian striker as well, and Berkovsky. That's a big addition to the squad, though. Those 4 guys, it should really help them fight for the title. And it's mad to think that Krylia are second, considering the amount of goals they're scoring. I think some of their early season form is to blame for that. Obviously, Sergeyev didn't come in until maybe 5 or 6 games into the season, which makes his record even more astounding because he at Torpedo didn't score once before his move to Krylia. So 22 goals has been in 21 or 22 games. He scored 4 hat tricks, I think, or something like that.
Wow.
Jesus.
So those guys, have been. They're going to be the 2, obviously, who are really fighting for it. Orenburg have not really lost any key players this window, and have added some depth to their squad and some firepower in Vorobyev. So you'd fancy them to carry on the fight and probably stay in the top 4. And the same with Torpedo. Obviously, they have lost Bukovsky, but they've added another solid defender in Kozlov, and they've added a really good midfielder in Shkolfek. So those 4 have not really lost anything this window. Alania have not signed anyone. either, and have not lost any key players from the squad. Their biggest threat is just they score a ridiculous amount of goals. Unlike Veles, who do play the attacking style, Alanya play ultra attacking and just score a ridiculous amount. They're the second highest goal scorers in the league, and have a very nice squad together. So you'd fancy them to keep it going, and then Veles maybe will just be the side. Obviously, them and Alanya, they're 4 points off the top four, tied on 49 points. You feel Veles without Maximenko might be the team who drop off. But we have to see how Stukalov changes the team in the second half of the season. He said in that interview that he was looking to change their style, maybe be a bit more adaptive rather than just going all out counter-attacking or all out attacking. So you never know. I think it's going to be very hard to predict. All four teams are looking strong, and plus Alanya are looking very strong going into this final stretch of 12 games, and it'll be a really good run-in. It'd be good to get some playoffs again after missing out last year.
Yeah, certainly. And it sounds like Ivan Sergeyev, who is a man who scores a lot with his head and quite a lot from crosses, one where it's a cross-head repeat, and it basically just sounds like a poor man's Charlie Wyke. And to discuss poor men, next is the relegation race at the bottom of the table. Now, of course, this season, because of the added teams and in the 22-team FNL season this year, there is 6 teams to go down. And Richard, it looks pretty surefire bet that 2 of them you would expect at least what should be, because what happens with the relegation places doesn't necessarily mean that those teams are relegated in the FNL, of course, every year. Or Shinnick and Tom Tomsk on 16 and 17 points respectively, you think?
Yeah, James, you'd like to think those 2 are gone. I think it's a tough start in management for Sasha Kersakov, Zenit and Dinamo, ex-Dinamo, Zenit and Sevilla and Spornaya player. Very tough start for him management at Tom. He came in and he's not really had much of an impact. And yeah, Shinnick seems to be cut adrift as well, and they've been a FNL fixture for many a year. But yeah, it looks like they're going to be playing in the 3rd tier next season. It's really tight with the rest of them, though. I mean, those 2, Tom and Shinnick, are cut adrift, but the rest of it looks really, really tight. I mean, Chertanova are down there. They did well last season, but obviously they lost those 8 players to Krylia and, are really struggling. I mean, got to be modest with them because, as they probably, keep referring to themselves, they are literally a football school. I think they were overperforming last season, and obviously this season it's been more of a struggle, but it's really tight down there. I mean, like David was saying, FACEL had a good run. They were 5 unbeaten before the winter break, and now they've lost some key personnel, so they'd gotten out of the relegation zone. But obviously now, there's going to be teams below them who are going to try and knock them back down there in there. It's really fascinating, the FNL. I think you've pretty much got 2 tables this season in the FNL. You've got the top 6 who've pulled away. It's basically 6 teams going for the 2 automatic promotion spots and the 2 playoff spots. And then you've kind of got 3 teams on 40 points who are 13 away from the drop, which are Scar, Neftekhimik and Baltica. And then everybody else could still be in a relegation fight. So I think it's going to be really close, with the exception of Tom and Shinnick, who seem to have sadly been cut adrift at the bottom.
And David, what's your take on the relegation race so far this year?
It will be a shame if Shinnick go. Obviously, they, as Richard said, they've been a fixture in this division for a long time. And I checked back when I was writing the articles, and I was pretty sure that from what I could gather, they've never played in the 3rd tier. They've always been 2nd tier or above. So if they were to go down, it would be the first time ever that they do so. Their manager, who left earlier in the season, Alexei Pobegalov, he has worked at Shinnick on and off for, I think it was almost 20 years in total. And this year, it just didn't work. I remember reading near the start of the season when they were struggling, people were saying, like ex-pros, ex-managers saying, he'll get them out of this. And it just did not work. And they replaced him with, I think it was Yuri Guzayev, the ex-Siska coach, as I recall. And even he could only muster 1 victory before the end of the season, before the end of the first half of the season there. yeah, that'll be sad. Obviously, Dinamo Bryansk are lingering in there. They've also got a 3-point deduction because of their COVID breaches, which saw a couple of their members of staff. One of them was banned for life, and the other one banned for a hefty amount of time because they knowingly played players who had tested positive for COVID in a match and didn't withdraw them. So that's not ideal, but they've been sucked down into the relegation race because of that 3-point deduction. Akron are there, but I have a feeling Akron are going to be okay. I think they've done well in the transfer window and they've been looking pretty solid over the winter break in their friendlies. I've been following them quite closely. Mark Lenin, the Brazilian, looks like he might be off though. He's come in and was notoriously pictured as being very overweight after flying in from Brazil. And they've got 4 foreigners excluding him, so it looks like he may well not ever play a game for them after signing last summer. But I have a feeling they'll be okay. I think FACL will continue to rise. Say the good form before the winter, plus the addition of Apayo is a real boost to them. Mm-hmm. I think we could see Tikstilshit getting sucked into the relegation race here without Apayo. On the flip side, they're only 3 points above FACL, and they've not done anything this winter to convince me that they're going to rescue themselves. So I'd be worried about them for sure. And Irtish, just with their 2 big losses of Maslovsky and potentially Sijoy, whether they could sort of teeter back down is a concern. Chetanova is a shame, as you said, they lost that big group of players last summer, who were their pride and joy, all 20, 21, 22 years old, the cream of the crop over the last 4 years. And then this season, they've had to basically play a whole team of guys who are, for the bulk of it, 18, 19, 17, 16. Pinyaev played, obviously, a couple of the games as a 15-year-old as well. And it's quite simply, these guys are just not experienced enough, Undoubtedly, with more years, more fixtures and seasons together, they'll improve, The crop of players like Zinkovsky, Sarveli, Prutsev, who are all excellent players, were all developed and started their careers together in the PFL before Chetanova even came up to the FNL. So I don't necessarily think relegation would be a bad thing for them to go down, get some PFL experience, get these seasons, get this crop of players to have another full season under the belt, playing against guys who are pros or semi-pros, experienced guys at the PFL level. I think it would be good for them, even if they do go down, which is looking likely. Obviously, they've also got to contend with UEFA Youth League in the second half of the season. They're playing, I think, Maccabi Tel Aviv. So guys like Pinyaev, Sokolov probably won't even be in the squad for the first team. They'll be off travelling around Europe for as long as the Chetanova team managed to stay in Europe. They could really struggle there. The 2 Premier League reserve teams, Krasnodar and Spartak Dva, both had pretty weak seasons. The previous year, I think both of them were in the top 6 or 7, I think, and have notoriously been quite good in recent years. But Krasnodar 2 for a long time were in the relegation zone. Spartak 2 have been up and down. They're currently on at least a 5-game streak without a win in the FNL. And they've lost Sylvanus Nimoli, obviously departed this winter after playing over 100 games for Spartak Dva. So I wouldn't rule out seeing one of those 2 clubs drop in. It depends what Spartak are going to do with guys like Ignatov and who's the centre half who sometimes plays with the first team. I forget his name, Gapornov. If those guys carry on playing for Spartak 2, then they'll probably be okay. But if they're going to keep being dragged out and left on the bench for the first team, then Spartak 2, who also have sort of lost, they've been playing a lot of 17 and 18-year-olds this season too. I wouldn't necessarily rule out those 2 teams from getting sucked into the battle down there either. So it's looking tight, but at both ends of the table, and it's looking like it's going to be a real interesting end to the season here.
And just before the winter break, of course, Spartak 2 even got topped 7-0 by Krasnodar 2 themselves, who were struggling at the time.
Yeah, indeed.
There's some quite interesting and exciting youngsters at Spartak 2, but it's like you say, they're all getting called up to the Spartak squad, especially with COVID and
absolutely
how fast games are coming. They're needed for the first team right now, even if they're just bench warmers.
Yeah, Oganessian had been terrific for Spartak 2 this year. really exciting looking winger / attacker. I think he did get his first team debut in the end as a sub appearance. I'm pretty sure in the Premier League.
Yeah, he did. Yeah,
and he's seeing less time in the FNL as a result of it. You know, if he's going to travel with a team, then that's a game that he can't play for Spartak too, unless obviously it's a home fixture. Home fixtures, you often see them playing both. So yeah, but they're struggling, but there are some good talents coming through. There's a 17-year-old as well who's been looking quite bright. Denisov, I think his name is, for Spartak too.
Yeah,
looks really, really solid and has played almost every minute, I think, for the team. So you know, the way is the future.
Yeah, Oganessian came on for Kokorin against Kimki, I believe it was, in the 3-2 win. And only played the last 10 minutes, but he was involved and didn't really look too out of place, which is promising for a 19-year-old coming on with only 10 minutes left in the game. But if we move on to what's been your biggest surprise so far in the FNL season, just the one team, Richard, who's been your biggest surprise so far?
So far, I'd probably say Veles, because I've read that counter press interview, and apparently it says they've got one of, if not the smallest budget in the FNL. And I was looking on their website earlier as well, and apparently they had goals to reach they were only founded in 2016, so they're a very new team. They're based down in Domodedovo in the south of Russia, in south of Moscow, sorry. And they had a target to reach the FNL by 2019. Well, they got there by 2020. They were 1 year off with that, but they've got ambitious plans. They want to reach the RPL by 2026. And so they, based on the current trajectory, they look on track to achieve that objective. Even if I think they might, even though I do agree with David, I think they might fall away in the second half of the season because loss of Maximenko, a key player, obviously. But yeah, considering the low budget and this is their first season at this level, I think they're probably going to have to go down as my surprise package. And I really enjoyed reading that counter press piece. You know, they look like a very progressive club, good young manager. So and them and Alania too as well. I think Alania, obviously, I think they obviously got promoted up to this level, and playing attacking football, fifth in the league, chance of getting promoted. Obviously, they're a famous and historic club, so be nice. I still fancy the four teams above them. Alania, maybe they might fall off as well, but you know, to be up there already in their first season back at this level is an impressive achievement. So probably those two teams, but again, because Veles is such a new young team, and with probably one of the smallest budgets in the league, I'm probably going to go with Veles as my surprise package so far.
And David, who would be your most disappointing team in the season?
Tough one, that. I was thinking this over, and I had two in mind. Chaika, personally, because at the start of the season, I was really thinking that they had a good enough squad to really do something this year. And most of the time, they just lacked a striker of what looked like a really exciting squad. And they've even added to it. You know, they brought in Ivan Olenikov this winter from Shinnik, who's a really good young winger, 22-year-old, out of the Cisco Academy. And they only sort of hit some decent form when Idris Umayev came in on loan from Akhmat and he started scoring. I think he scored like 6 goals in like 10 appearances or something for them. But you know, they went 5 without a win in the run into the winter break, and lingering in the bottom half of the table. And I had personally thought that they could challenge. So that was a disappointment for me. And I think Baltica were the other. They'd started the season really well, and I had hopes. You know, I think we all don't really want to see that stadium in Kaliningrad go to waste. And they started the season really well, and then their striker Aleph got injured, and their drop in form seemed to coincide with him being injured, which was a shame. And they were sort of quite inconsistent before that, and they're in that now group of 3 teams on 40 points who are not going to get relegated, but who also aren't going to get promoted. So they're firmly stuck in the FNL for another season. And for a while there, it seemed like they were really going to challenge for the top 4. So, yeah, they'd be my 2 disappointments, Baltica and Chaika.
If I were to weigh in myself here, if I could pick a disappointment of not so much a team. But if it would be a team, it would probably be Chaika as well. If just for the rebranding, where they changed from the classic seagull to what looks like a pair of white triangles and a blue triangle. But from a more personal level, it's a player in particular, and it's actually Magomed Michlishev. Michlishev moved to Chaika on loan in August and only played twice and had just zero impact whatsoever. And I must admit, at the time, I wasn't surprised Michlishev had made the move, drop down a division, because his impact at Akhmat in the last few years has just been falling and falling year in, year out, and seeing less minutes. And he's now 28, so he needed to really reignite his career to an extent. But he's dropped down to Chaika, and it's just been disappointing and deservedly kept out of the side. But if we're going to keep onto the theme of disappointing sections of the FNL this season, we've got a little bit of a tongue-in-cheek guest section from our friends over at Whatever This Is. And this is the official W.T.I FNL Frauds of 2020-21. Now, I asked Hanu and Artyom their own respective frauds prior to the podcast. And in typical fashion, they came back with some quite controversial and quite humorous stuff. And Hanu and Artyom both believe that Chitanova are FNL frauds because they are, in quotation marks, just shit. Marks Lennon because he didn't even play despite the hype around his name. Alexander Tashayev because of how he's played for Spartak 2 this season. The entirety of Bryansk and the city of Orenburg are also apparently frauds. So not just the teams, but the entirety of the city. Now, Artem also wanted to add that any team with a 2 at the end of their name, because reserve teams do not deserve to be in professional leagues. So I will agree with them. And David first, do you have any potential frauds to add to the list?
Well, it's a weird one to think about. I'll join the sort of the meme side of this, and I'll go with Sergei Uran, because he believed that Ostan Aronov couldn't be the age he said he was just because he was from Uzbekistan. So let's go with Sergei Uran for that one, I think.
Yeah, Uran deserves to be on any fraud list, whether it's the RPL, FNL, or anything else. Now, I'll come back to you both with some last little bit on the FNL, but David, any honourable mentions that you'd like to get out your chest that we may have missed earlier?
I'll quickly mention Neftekhimik. They brought in a new manager over the winter break, Novikov, the ex-Dinamo coach, who you know well, Richard. And I wonder how that will develop. They also signed Kalugin from Sochi on a permanent deal, and brought in a Dinamo loanee, Denisov, who Novikov had obviously worked with both back at Dinamo.
Yeah, I saw those 2 transfers.
So that'll be an interesting thing to watch in the spring. Sorry, to see how those guys get on. I said before that I was wanting to give a mention to Akron. I think their winter business has been seemingly solid. Guys like Maxim Mirovic, who once scored for Kuban against Spartak in the RPL, if you remember that one, James.
Yes.
And I think they've been looking pretty solid in the winter break there. The only other thing I wanted to mention was Said Aliyev. Also, coming back to relegation, Tambov obviously are in tatters right now, and if they dissolve, it's highly likely that 15th, the club that finishes in not 15th, 17th, will not be relegated. So it could well be that we're left with just 5 relegation spots instead of 6, if Tambov dissolve during the summer, which at this point seems quite likely. And related to Tambov was Said Aliyev, who was at Veles in the first half of the season and caught COVID. A lot of the players who live or are based in the south of Russia seem to caught COVID. Shapi, I remember, got it as well. And he was apparently suffering quite badly with long COVID and therefore barely played a game for Veles in the first half of the season, despite being a young, sprightly. He's only 22, very fast, and had a decent pedigree from his time at Luksh. Apparently he could go to Tambov, who are obviously desperate for any players at this stage. He may well sign for Tambov. Apparently, he's recovered from his long COVID that he was suffering from. So that'll be an interesting one to watch because I've had my eye on him since he was in the Angie Youth Academy, like back when he was like 17. Caught my eye just because of how quick he was. So I'm hoping that goes through just so we can see him in the Premier League. But yeah, they're my honourable mentions.
So we could talk FNL matters all day, and we have tried to make a little bit of a concerted effort here at RFN Towers to focus a little bit more on the FNL this month, and particularly during the winter break, and mainly from yourself, David, instead of just sticking to the top flight all the time, because Russia is a massive country and there is far more than just these 16 teams that are in the RPL. So if we do move from, say, Krasnodar to another such reserve teams that are in the FNL, to that one in particular's parent club, the first team. Now, Krasnodar themselves do return to action earlier than the rest of the RPL this week, as they face Dinamo Zagreb in the Europa League round of 32 first leg fixture. To quickly summarise some key news that went on at Krasnodar during the break. Now, the Bulls did hold 2 separate training camps during the winter, the first one of which was in the United Arab Emirates, and then they travelled straight after that to Marbella in Spain. They returned to Krasnodar on the 12th of February, and also actually face off against Sochi this weekend in the next round of the Russian Cup. Now, behind the scenes, their assistant coach Igor Zakharyak has actually left the club, and he was replaced by Vitaly Korneev. Now, Korneev has worked under Murad Masayev previously, and the pair have got quite a long relationship working together. Previously, they've both coached various Krasnodar youth sides in the past, and Korneev's actually been part of the Krasnodar coaching setup since 2011, and was most recently heading up the under-16s until his appointment to the first team. So if we come to yourself again first, David, now you've been keeping a little bit of an eye on how Krasnodar have been performing in some of their winter friendlies this season. One in particular as well was where they played arguably rivals for Europe this season.
Yeah, I try as best as I can to keep abreast with everyone over the winter break. When there's no Russian football on, you just take any opportunity you can to try and watch a match. Obviously, with work and often the games taking place during the day, it's a little bit harder. If I've got a slow work day, I can have one on my desk. But Krasnodar, they lost 4-0 to No, it was 4-0. I don't think they even scored in the second half. If they did, then it was 4-1. But they were 4-0 down at half-time to Lokomotiv. They had started what you would say was almost a full-strength team, barring injuries. Safonov's been out for the whole of the winter break. They had... the front four was like strong. It was Berg, Cabela, Wanderson, and Klaassen. And they lost 4-0. And the clips that I saw of the goals, it looked like a very poor defensive performance from guys like Martinovic and Chernov. Looked like a couple of the goals came from down Chernov's wing. So yeah, that was very worrying. Just a few weeks before they're about to go and play in the Europa League, and before the season restarts, they lose heavily to what was not necessarily even a full strength Loco team. I think it was like partially rotated. So yeah, like the fact that I think Rifat Zhimaletdinov scored in that game potentially was one thing that caught me by surprise. So that wasn't so good. They did beat Rostov in another fixture, but most of the other fixtures have seen them, rotate. A lot of the Krasnodar 2 guys are out there with them, like guys like Sabua, Spurtian, etc. So they've been getting game time just to bolster the squad, because right now they're suffering quite a few injuries, like as I said, Safonov, and as we discussed before, guys like Ari's out. Stotsky's been out for, I couldn't even tell you how long, so long, which is a massive shame because he's such a likeable player. And then obviously in recent weeks, Kaio looks like he's picked up a knock as well. And last week we got the news that Christian Ramirez is going to be out for what seems like some months with an ACL. So looks like they're really struggling with injuries, and therefore squad depth again. Obviously, we know that they like to try and fill their squad out with the young players, but if they're not good enough, then it makes the squad depth not as strong as it should be. So yeah, maybe some worrying signs going into the start of the restart of the season, and particularly the Europa League game, where we just need as many coefficient points as possible from Krasnodar. We thought Dinamo was a favourable draw considering the opponents they could have had, and it is. Obviously, ignoring the fact that they only conceded once in the group stage and comfortably got past Siska. But relative to who else they could have drawn, it was favourable. So we really need them to try and beat them, get to the next round, pick up as many coefficient points as possible to make up for the last couple of years, which have been very poor. So worrying signs.
Yeah, and Richard, there's not been the largest flurry of activity in terms of transfers at Krasnodar over the winter.
It's been very, very quiet, hasn't it, James? They brought in Leo Goglichidze from Chaika, but then they loaned him straight back to Nizhny Novgorod. Goglichidze is a left back, and Ramirez, who obviously now has suffered that unfortunate injury as a left back, but yeah, obviously they loaned him back to the FNL before news of Ramirez's injury came about. But yeah, they've been very, very quiet. They've not brought in anybody of note. Again, I hate to keep harking on about it, and we're all getting sick of it. But once again, the foreigner limit has really hampered them because they've been linked with the top scorer in the Turkish league, Bupenza, who plays for Hatayspor. But obviously, they're already at the foreign limit. He's a Gabonese striker who's scored a lot of goals in Turkey this season, Bupenza. But obviously, they're at the Krasnodar at the 8-player foreign limit, and they can't really bring in him until they've moved a foreigner on. And there was briefly talk at the middle of January of Marcus Berg maybe moving on, maybe going back to his homeland in Sweden. He's out of contract in the summer, I think, but obviously nothing has come of it, and it's far too late for them now with the game being on Thursday for them to register a new player. They've already submitted their squad, so obviously now it's too late to do anything about that now. So they're probably just going to have to go with what they've got. Ramirez is a blow because he is one of Krasnodar's best players, I think. I'm still thankful that it wasn't Cabela who got that injury, or Safanov, or Martinovic at the back, but Ramirez behind those 2 or 3 is in the next batch of key players for Krasnodar, alongside Berg, I would probably say. It's going to be an interesting tie because I echo what David was saying. When the draw was made, it could have been worse for Krasnodar. Dinamo Zagreb obviously showed in the group stages that they got through a group with Feyenoord and CSKA, which was a surprise to me because they'd lost a few players over the last couple of seasons, and I wasn't Danny Olmo being the most noteworthy one, but they've got a strong defence, anchored of course by 19-year-old wonder kid Gvardiol, who's already signed for RB Leipzig for next season, to replace Deo Upamecano, who's gone to Bayern just recently, for next season. So they've already, it shows the talent that they've got from their academy there. So it's going to be a tough game. Obviously, they showed against CSKA and the other teams in that group that they're a good side, Dinamo, and they're already a month back after their winter break. They've already been playing competitive football for a month. So it's that old story again. Can the Russian teams after the winter break get up to speed quickly? Because they're coming against a team here who have already played 5, 6, 7 competitive games after the winter break. So tough, but passable, but tough, I would say.
Yeah, of course, Dinamo Zagreb, for those who don't really know much about the HNL, they have a winter break, but it is just over a month long, from the second week of December to the second week of January. Very much unlike the Russian one due to the meteorological conditions over here. Now, I will quickly have both really alluded to it, but I will quickly just pass over some of the injuries just to condense them down into one. And of course, as mentioned, Dimitri Stotsky still out with a long-term injury. Christian Ramirez joins him on the sidelines, who both definitely missed the match. Ramirez with that cruciate ligament injury that will keep him out for the season. And then there are a couple of doubts. Matvey Safonov, as David mentioned, not actually played any of the friendlies whatsoever, but he is, according to sources and rumours in Krasnodar, set to be available for the match. And if that's the case, that is a huge boost for them. While Ari and Kayo have been reported as doubts. Now, Ari has not played a single minute at all since December the 5th, where he went off with a hamstring injury in the 5-0 win over Rota. He scored 2 goals, one of which a penalty, and then got taken off at half-time. Now, Kayo has been injured on and off since then, but he has also picked up minutes in half of Krasnodar's winter friendlies. We will get more concrete information on these players' availability on Wednesday afternoon when Murad Masayev and the young Shapi Suleimanov alongside him face the press in Krasnodar. So, Richard, you've already alluded to Gvardival being one of your key men to focus on. So, David, each one from each team, who do you think could be some of the key men in this tie?
Well, it's got to be Krylia. For Krasnodar, we know from the group stage that he was a make or break player. If Vanderson had been fitter for longer, you'd be saying him, because at the start of the season he was so good. He was, like, as we said, at promise levels. But Krylia looks like he can be a real game winner. So for Krasnodar, definitely Krylia. If he's playing well on the night, then they're going to be creating chances and they're going to be getting in and around the box. So Remy Krylia for Krasnodar, and for Dinamo, obviously we all caught them play against CSKA twice in the Europa. We can't ignore the fact they have got an amazing defence. But I'll go and pick Lovromaya, who young midfielder who was up there as one of the best chance creators in the Europa League. At the top was actually Nikola Vlasic, interesting enough. Considering how poor CSKA's record was at scoring, he was creating all the chances, which I think was something we all observed at the time. They were having loads of chances, but just not scoring any. But Lovromaya picked up 3 assists and was one of the top 10 chance creators in the group stages. So going forward, he's going to be the man, trying to make things tick over for Dinamo. But based on the matches with CSKA, they're going to be sitting deep. That's what they did in Moscow. They sat deep, just defended hard. CSKA had real chances to score that game. Goalkeeper just made some good saves, and CSKA spurned some easy chances. And then in the reverse fixture, it was just set pieces and counter attacks, which did CSKA over. I think they lost 3-0 in that one. So yeah, it looks like it could be some tough games, but Krasnodar have got the playmakers to potentially unlock that defence in Krylia, Klaassen, and Vanderson. So, I still give them a shot if they're on there playing on form on the day.
Yeah, certainly. Dinamo Zagreb are quite an interesting side for Krasnodar to face, because when you look at the rest of the draw, it does seem, on the very face of it, quite a kind and favourable draw to Krasnodar. However, Dinamo have got a very, very good defence. They had one of the best defences in the entirety of the Europa League. I believe they only conceded 1 goal in the group stages so far this season. In the group stages, in previous years, I wouldn't be so worried about Krasnodar having to really break down packed defences. That was one of their big benefits and one of their big strengths of previous years. But especially during the time when they were playing 2 games a week every 3 days and so on, Krasnodar really did struggle to break sides down. Now, they lost against Akhmat, they lost against Khimki, both away from home. And Akhmat and Khimki in those games did sit deep, soak up as much pressure as possible, and then break on the counter, exactly how Dinamo will play. Now, I expect Krasnodar's quality to hopefully come through at some point if they can get firing. Of course, it's been a very long time without any real competitive football for them. But these losses in the first half of the season, like I say, with Khimki, Akhmat, Dinamo, where it was 1 or 2 goal losses and very close games, but all against sides who sat deep and countered. Richard, what do you think about Krasnodar's chances against Dinamo, and perhaps any key men for the Bulls?
Yeah, I'll echo about Remy Krylia, because as I said last week on the chat, that he's, when he came back, on the podcast last week, when he came back into Krasnodar's team halfway through the group stages before the winter break, he was the key driving force into him getting through. His experience proved absolutely vital in that home win against Rennes. So I'm going to go Krylia. I think Wanderson hopefully as well. I think he's an explosive player when he gets on form. As we were saying at the start of the season, he was on fire. Hopefully he can, after a nice long winter break, he can be fresh and rediscover that form from early on in the season. As I echo, Martinovic, I think, is going to be very, very important because, especially if Kayo is not going to be fit, because, it's going to mean Yegor Sorokin going alongside Martinovic, and Martinovic is going to have to anchor that defence, especially in absence of Ramirez as well. Safonov's going to be key, and then Klassen. Yeah, those are pretty much Krasnodar's go-to players. I mean, they could take heart from the fact that in that first game that CSKA played against Dinamo, even though CSKA didn't win, they totally outplayed Dinamo in that game, and they had tons and tons of chances, as we've just mentioned, just didn't put the ball in the back of the net. So, hopefully Krasnodar won't be as wasteful. Hopefully Berg will have his shooting boots on. Cabela will create some chances. Klaassen and Vanderson on the flanks will also get in behind and get some crosses in, get some balls in, get service to the strikers. Just interesting about Dinamo Zagreb as well. A couple of other names in their squad that are noteworthy to me. They brought in the winter break Stefan Ristovski, a Macedonian right back from Sporting Lisbon in Portugal. He was deregistered. I think he might have had a fallout with the coach there. He didn't play in the first half. They're top of the Portuguese league, and they brought him in. There's a face familiar to former Cardiff City fans. Kevin Fiafal Kafarin is in their defence. They've also got the Croatian number one keeper, I think, Dominik Livakovic. So they've been shopping in Scandinavia. Rasmus Lauritsen, a Danish centre half, they brought in from Norrköping. So there's a few names there. Myers, obviously, like David said, is going to be a key player for them. Creative midfielder. I'm looking forward to this tie. I think Krasnodar can beat Dinamo, but first leg is key. I think to have any chance, they've got to take something with them to Zagreb. They've got to win the first leg. I think if they draw or lose the first leg, I think it's going to be very, very difficult to turn it around in Zagreb because the Maximir Stadium's quite fortress both for Dinamo and for the Croatian national team. So you'd think they're going to have to make use of that first leg. And it'd be interesting to see how they juggle the cup game in between as well, because the Krasnodar obviously playing the cup at the weekend and then the second leg's next week. So if Krasnodar do well in the first leg against Dinamo and take a lead to Zagreb, how do they approach the cup? Do they sacrifice the cup this year and concentrate on the league and probably trying to get through a Europa League round? It's going to be a fascinating juggling act. Let's just say.
Yeah, and Dinamo Zagreb are one of those Eastern European clubs who are basically in the Champions League or Europa League year in, year out. They win their own league every single year, and because of that, they've got an extraordinary amount of experience at this level. And that experience at this level, I mean, a lot of Krasnodar, I mean, yes, it's a young side, and Krasnodar themselves have got an abundance of recent experience in the Europa League, which they didn't have in the first half of the season in the Champions League group stages. But if you look at Dinamo Zagreb's statistics and data from last season, in the HNL, they both attempted the most and completed the most lateral passes per 100 passes in their national championship, and completed the least and attempted the least long passes per 100 in the league. When you flip that onto the international stage or the European stage, it's the complete opposite. It's the far more direct and the far less likely to try and play a lateral, to try and play it out from the back. What Dinamo Zagreb are is they're very much like Crvena Zvezda, like Partizan from Serbia. And Ludogorets, and Ferencvaros, they use their experience at this level and their know-how of exactly how to approach these games. And I just feel like their approach is definitely going to be a stubborn one that's going to ask Krasnodar a lot more questions than perhaps a lot of people expect. And we're really seeing that in the CSKA game early on in the season. Like you said, David, Vlasic is one of the highest creators of the Europa League this season. But CSKA still couldn't score. Now, Krasnodar's quality in the final third is more than CSKA's, and especially CSKA's at the time before strengthening with Solomon Rondon, of course. So to move on to some predictions, I'm perhaps going to predict that this may not be the happiest of games for Krasnodar. They haven't played in 3 months' time, and Dinamo really are no mean feat. So, guys, avoiding scores, just David, what's your prediction? Do you think it could be a good night for Krasnodar?
Just the first leg or overall?
Just the first one for now.
They're at home first leg, right?
Yeah.
I think they can win at home. If the game's going to play out anything like the Siska game did, the Siska home game, then Krasnodar will have a lot of the ball in and around the box, and you fancy them just to be a little bit more clinical if they're really on it. So I'm going to back them to win the home fixture, but it will be tight.
And Richard, what do you think?
I'll probably agree with David in the home fixture. I'm going to actually go 2-1 Krasnodar. I think Dinamo Zagreb will score, though. I'm going to go 2-1 Krasnodar. I'll try and be optimistic. Just hoping I've not put the kiss of death on them.
Yeah, I think the most optimistic that I get at this point of the season is probably goalless draw at the very best for me. I just think it's going to be a very, very low scoring game. Krasnodar, yes, they haven't, aside from that 4-0 local loss, they haven't actually lost a game in any competition since the end of November. Now, yeah, they haven't played since the end of December. But anyway, they're in decent form. They're getting stronger, and it looks like they are hopefully going to kick on for the second half of the season, for them anyway, and probably for Russian football as a whole, to be quite honest. But I just think that Dinamo Zagreb are very, very well organised, and these 8 games that they've got on Krasnodar are just going to be a lot, really going to count for a lot on the night. And I'm just, my pessimistic hat on, always looking back to every single time we see a team play well in the first half, or at least do well enough in the first half of European stages. Then the winter break comes, the 3-month break, and then they come back, and it looks like they haven't played with each other for 3 months, because that's exactly what they've done. So I won't quite share the optimism, to be honest, but I do hope I'm proven wrong and I can eat my hat in 2 weeks' time. Now, you can't catch the Krasnodar game on your usual channels on TV, but if you do want to partake in a new service that we'll be offering through RFN here, and it's basically just a discussion during the game that'll be hosted by Hanu and Artem of whatever this is on the YouTube channel and on Clubhouse. Some of the other RFN writers will be popping in and out throughout too. So if you want to join in with that, get in touch with us on Twitter. It's Russ Football News, or with Hanu and Artem themselves. On the site this week, we'll have one last follow-up piece on the FNL from David, and that is a list, a scouting of players that could possibly make the step up. And our full preview for the game and some more opinion pieces as usual will be coming up on the site. We've got a few existing guests to come on the pod in the immediate future, so keep an eye out for that, as well as some returning old favourites, but unfortunately no spoilers right here. And David, your Twitter handle?
You can find me on Twitter at RFN_David.
And Richard?
You can find me on Twitter at RichDPike89, at RichDPike89.
This has been the RFN Podcast. Goodbye for now.
Идет футбольный матч, летит над полем мяч. Веди его, беги, точнее его ударь. Но мяч берет в ноги решительный вратарь. Не напрасно футбольное поле самых ловких и смелых влечет. Здесь нужны тренировка и воля, быстрота, увлечение, расчет.